Why do some hunters on the same lease, hunting the same property, see hogs every single time they go out, while others sit for days and get nothing? It is not luck, and it is not always the stand location. It is 15 specific decisions that compound on each other, and most of them cost nothing to implement. I have been running hogs on private land across the South for going on 18 years. I have killed a lot of hogs, and I have made a lot of mistakes, and the 15 things I am going to walk you through today are what I wish somebody had handed me in year one. Some of these are going to sound obvious. The obvious ones are on the list, because they are the ones that most hunters know about and do not actually do consistently. And one of them, trick number 12, is something I have only seen described correctly in one place. And it changed how I locate sounders on unfamiliar ground faster than anything else in this list. Stick around for that one. Trick 1, shoot the solo boar first when a sounder shows up, not the first animal you see. When a family group of hogs called a sounder arrives at a feeder or bait site, the mature boar is often hanging back 30 to 50 yards from the group, which is roughly the distance from one basketball hoop to the other on a standard court. He is there, but he is not committing until the sow and juveniles have fed for several minutes. If you shoot the first hog that steps out, which is almost always a sow or a juvenile, the boar detects the shot, associates it with that location, and either leaves the area entirely or goes fully nocturnal. But if you pass the first several animals and wait for the boar to commit and come in, you have the opportunity to take the most valuable target and the one that will damage your property the least going forward, since mature boars are responsible for less agricultural destruction than sows that are actively producing litters. Trick 2. Use a 2-day cell camera rule before you hunt any new setup. Every new bait site, regardless of how much sign you found when you set it up, needs at least 2 full nights of camera activity before you hunt it. I have blown setups in Beauregard Parish by hunting on night 1 when I had multiple camera hits, only to have the sounder pattern shift within 48 hours because I contaminated the site on my first visit. The 2-day rule is not about patience. It is about giving the dominant sow time to decide the location is safe enough to commit to during huntable hours, meaning dusk and the last 2 hours of daylight. Hunt it too early, and she makes a different decision. Wait 2 nights, confirm pattern on camera, then hunt it. Trick 3, win first feeder placement. Before you decide where to put a feeder or bait site, walk the terrain and determine the prevailing evening wind direction for that specific location. Hogs approach food sources from the downwind side, meaning they approach with the wind in their face so they can smell what is ahead of them before they commit. If you place your feeder without considering wind direction, you are placing it so that the approaching sounder will smell your stand position before it gets to the food. Place the feeder so that your stand is upwind of the approach corridor. The hogs will circle downwind of the feeder, pick up the corn smell, and approach from a direction that keeps them upwind of you. On my Jackson County, Florida property, I repositioned a boss buck feeder 40 yards based on the evening thermal pattern and went from empty camera frames during legal shooting hours to consistent evening action within 1 week. Same location, different angle. Trick 4. Use an elevated stand rather than a ground blind for water setups in summer, but flip to ground level for everything else. The reference to hog vision that you hear everywhere is that hogs have poor eyesight. That is accurate. But in summer, when you are hunting water holes and wallows, which is where hogs concentrate when temperatures push above 85 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly hot enough to make sweat run down your forearms in the first hour, elevated positioning gives you a better view angle into the dense vegetation around those water sources. The ground blind advantage comes back during cooler months when hogs move through open terrain at bait sites, and your outline against sky or trees matters. Match your position type to the hunting scenario. Trick 5 is where I want to spend a moment on the biology, because it explains why the timing advice works across different properties and different seasons. Hogs don't sweat. They regulate body temperature through wallowing and through reduced activity during the hottest part of the day. When ambient temperature drops in the late afternoon, roughly in the 2 to 3 hours before sunset, hogs that have been bedded since midday experience a body temperature drop that reduces the physiological cost of movement. The cooling trend is what gets them up, not hunger alone. This is why the evening window is so much more productive than the mid-afternoon hours during warm months. You are hunting the coincidence of lower temperature, reduced light, and the accumulated hunger of a full day of bedding. All three factors converge in that same 90-minute window before dark. Trick 5, hunt the 2 hours before dark. Not at dark. Not at last light. The productive window at most bait sites during the warmer months is roughly from 90 minutes before sunset until shooting light ends. Hogs that have been bedded since midday begin moving toward food sources before dark, and the dominant sow often commits her sounder to a location in that final 90-minute window. If you are walking in at sunset, you are arriving after the action has potentially started, and your approach is bumping animals that were already moving. I have been late to my own setups in Lavaca County and watched camera data confirm that 2 sounders arrived during my approach walk. The productive sites I have had in summer start from a stand position that I reach 2 hours before shooting light ends, settled and still. I learned Trick 5 the wrong way. For the first 3 seasons I hunted hogs seriously. I would settle into position at dusk, watch the feeder for 40 minutes, and walk out when it got dark enough that I could not see clearly. My camera data from those same setups showed the sounder arriving consistently between 15 and 30 minutes after I left. I was departing precisely at the moment the animals were committing to the location. My wife pointed out that I was treating hog hunting like it had a closing time, which is accurate and I have no defense for it. Staying until genuine darkness is a discipline problem, not a knowledge problem, and it cost me 3 seasons worth of shots. Trick 6. Leave your stand undisturbed for 3 days after any hunt, regardless of whether you killed anything. Most hunters understand rest after a missed shot. Far fewer apply the same rest logic after a successful hunt, where blood scent, handling scent, gut content smell, and the disruption of dragging or processing on site all deposit a heavy human and death signature at a location. I have seen camera data from properties where a successful kill produced 0 sounder activity at that site for 5 to 7 days after. 3 days is the minimum to let that location recover enough that returning animals do not treat it as an active danger zone. Trick 7. Place your feeder at the edge of cover, not in the middle of an open area. Hogs feel most comfortable committing to food sources where they have a cover retreat within 30 yards, which is about the distance from home plate to just past the pitcher's mound on a standard baseball diamond. An open field feeder that requires a hog to walk 200 yards from cover to reach it will get hit on camera at 2 in the morning, not at dusk. If the same feeder placed adjacent to a tree line or brush edge, where hogs can approach through cover and retreat quickly if alarmed, will produce vastly better daylight activity. Site selection is not just about where the hogs are, it is about where the hogs are comfortable stopping. If you are getting value from this, hit subscribe, more of these coming. Trick 8. Use the solar hog light at your feeder position instead of hunting over corn alone. A solar-powered green or red hog light mounted at feeder height attracts hogs to the location at night and keeps them returning to that specific spot by creating a visual marker they associate with food. This is particularly effective for property owners who cannot be on site every night. The light runs on a small solar panel, costs under $40 at Tractor Supply or online, and produces consistent camera results within the first week at a new setup. The green wavelength is less visible to hogs than white light and does not trigger the alarm response that a white flashlight does when an animal is already at the site. I have been running solar lights on 3 setups for 2 seasons, and the consistency of sounder activity under the light versus non-lit setups on the same property is not close. Trick 9. When you miss a shot, rest the site for 2 weeks, not 1 week, not 5 days, 2 weeks minimum. A missed shot deposits a gunshot sound signature, your scent, the smell of burned powder, and sometimes blood or hair from a graze, all at a location the sounder just experienced a threat event. On the cameras I have run after misses, and the same sounder that was visiting in the last hour of daylight went exclusively after midnight within 48 hours, and the nocturnal shift persisted. 2 weeks of 0 human presence at that location is the shortest reset I have found reliable across multiple properties. In the meantime, hunt a different site on the same property rather than compressing your access down to one location. A thing worth acknowledging about Trick 9. The 2-week rest after a miss is hard to follow when you have limited hunting days. I have broken this rule twice on pressured properties and watched camera data confirm each time that I produced extended nocturnal-only patterns by coming back too soon. One of those properties in Washington County, Georgia, took nearly 6 weeks to return to any daylight activity after I hunted it on day 8 post-miss. Impatient and contaminated the site on my entry walk. The cost of breaking the rule is almost always higher than the cost of following it. If the property has multiple setups, rest the missed site and hunt a different one. If you only have one setup on a small property, the 2-week rest is the correct call, even though it is frustrating. Trick 10. Run protein feed or cottonseed alongside corn at year-round setups. Plain corn keeps hogs coming, but it does not keep them returning at the same predictable time. High-protein supplements, specifically cottonseed cake or pellets, create a stronger nutritional pull that hogs develop a pattern around, returning daily at similar times in the same way that deer pattern around mineral licks. A Gone forum thread from a hunter in Hardin County who runs cattle operation adjacent to his hog lease documented this behavioral difference over 12 consecutive weeks using camera data across 2 comparable setups, one corn only and one corn plus cottonseed. The cottonseed setup produced sounder arrivals within a 30-minute window on 8 of 12 weeks. The corn-only setup had arrival times spread across a 4-hour window with no consistent pattern. One property, one person's data, worth testing on your own ground. Trick 11. Never cross an active hog trail on your approach to a stand. This one seems obvious until you think about how many times you have taken the most direct route from your vehicle to your stand without mapping that route against known hog travel corridors. Like crossing an active hog trail deposits a band of human scent directly across the path the sounder uses to approach your setup. When that sounder hits your foot scent on the trail, the dominant sow reads it as a human who recently crossed through the area. On unpressured properties, she may still come to the bait. On pressured properties, that scent band is the reason the cameras show activity stopping 75 yards from the feeder and reversing. Map your entry route specifically to avoid trail crossings. Where terrain forces a crossing, cross at the narrowest possible angle, perpendicular to the trail rather than walking along it. Trick 12 is the one I mentioned at the start, and I want to spend time on it because it is genuinely underused. The saddle hunt setup for hogs. A saddle is a low point or depression in a ridgeline or elevated terrain feature, the geographic equivalent of the low point between 2 hills, roughly the size of the dip between your knuckles if you make a fist. Hogs traveling between a bedding area and a food or water source will almost always move through the lowest point of available terrain because they are heavy. They conserve energy on grades, and saddle points reduce their exposure on ridgelines. If you identify a saddle on your property between known bedding and known feeding areas, and you position a stand on the downwind side of that saddle, you are intercepting every hog using that travel corridor, regardless of whether you have bait deployed. I found a saddle crossing in Tensas Parish bottomland country by reading a USGS topo map before my first visit to the property. A's walked in and confirmed heavy rooting sign in the saddle depression itself. Killed a mature boar on the second evening sit without any bait at all. The terrain was doing the work. A lot of hog hunters think exclusively in terms of bait and feeder placement. The hunters who kill the most hogs on new properties think first about how hogs move through the terrain and intercept that movement. Trick 13, feed year-round, not just during hunting season. Hog populations on a property establish feeding patterns based on reliable food sources. A feeder that runs continuously for 12 months creates a sounder that budgets that location into its regular circuit as a predictable calorie source. A feeder that goes active in October and quiet in February teaches the sounder nothing reliable and produces inconsistent hunting. The cost of year-round corn at a modest feeder, roughly 50 pounds per week, is under $3 a day at current feed prices. That investment buys you a sounder that treats your feeder as a permanent fixture rather than a seasonal curiosity. On a property in Pike County that I have been running year-round for 4 seasons, I have had consistent camera activity within 100 yards of the feeder every single month, including February and March when most hunters have quit. The sounder on that property has a predictable 30-minute arrival window in the evening that is held for 2 consecutive seasons. Trick 14, process hogs away from your hunting area, or at least downwind and at significant distance. The smell of gut content, blood, and processing work is a threat signal that carries in the air for hours and at distance. On small properties under 200 acres, roughly the area of about 150 standard residential lots, A field dressing within hearing and smelling distance of an active bait site can shut that site down for several days. I process on the downwind edge of the property, as far from any active setup as the terrain allows. Where I have to process closer, I remove gut piles and clean the site before leaving, which helps, but does not fully eliminate the smell. If you have the option of removing the animal from the site entirely before processing, that is the cleanest outcome for your hunting area. Trick 15, hunt the last 30 minutes of shooting light and do not leave early. This is the one that costs nothing, and that most hunters consistently under-execute. The final 30 minutes before legal shooting light ends is consistently the highest activity period at most bait sites in the warmer months. Hogs that have been bedded since midday begin moving toward feeding areas in that window, and sounders often commit to a specific location in the last 15 to 20 minutes before dark. Hunters who pack up their gear, shift in their stand, check their phone, or start their walkout during that window are cutting off the most productive part of their site. Settle in, stay still, stay quiet, and wait until actual dark. The camera data across every property I have run confirms it. Roughly 40% of all sounder activity at my bait sites during the summer months falls in the 90-minute window before shooting light ends, with the peak in the final 30. A note on sour corn as it applies to several tricks on this list. If you have watched the sour corn video on this channel, you know that fermented corn in a buried hole keeps hogs on the site for 15 to 30 minutes rather than 5 minutes for a surface pour. Same principle applies to Trick 7 and Trick 14 specifically. Hogs that stay at a location are easier to harvest than hogs that arrive, eat fast, and leave. The time on site variable is as important as whether they showed up at all. A buried sour corn hole under the feeder is worth adding to any setup where you are struggling to get a shot, despite camera confirmation of arrivals. The underlying pattern connecting all 15 of these is that hog hunting effectiveness compounds. A hunter who applies 5 of these consistently will outperform a hunter who knows all 15 but executes inconsistently. The sow is the decision maker in any sounder. She is tracking wind, evaluating past threat experiences at a location, reading foot traffic patterns, and making a real-time assessment of whether to commit. Every trick on this list either reduces the information she has to flag your setup as dangerous, or increases the caloric and behavioral pull of your location relative to alternatives. You do not need to implement all 15 before your next hunt. Pick the 3 that describe mistakes you are currently making, apply them consistently for 4 weeks, and run your cameras as the evaluator. The cameras will tell you whether the sounder is responding before you need to form any other opinion about it. That's one thing the reference script touched on that I want to address directly. Stalking versus stand hunting. The right answer depends on the property. On large parcels with low pressure where hogs are moving openly during daylight, covering ground and using thermals to locate sounders by smell before you see them is genuinely effective. On smaller pressured properties, stand and bait is more efficient, because covering ground on a small property deposits your scent everywhere, compressing hog movement the same way overhunting a stand does. Know your property size and pressure level before you commit to a method. Both work in the right context. The saddle principle from Trick 12 applies beyond just ridge systems. Any terrain feature that concentrates hog movement into a predictable corridor, a creek crossing, a fence gap, a break in a brush line, a point of timber that extends into an open field, creates an interception opportunity that does not require bait. On my Fayette County property, I have a fence line gap that is the only practical crossing between a creek bottom bedding area and an ag field edge where hogs feed in summer. I have a cell camera on that gap, and it confirms sounder crossings on over 60% of evenings during active season. That crossing is more reliable than any bait setup I run on the same property. Read the terrain. The hogs are already moving through it in predictable ways before you ever set out a feeder. If you hunt the same property year after year, the single highest value investment you can make is camera coverage across the full property. During a month, you do not hunt. It's pull every camera from your hunting setups and spend 30 days with them on travel corridors, water sources, and terrain features instead of feeders. The data you collect about how hogs use your property when you are not influencing their behavior with bait is more useful than anything you will learn from watching them at a feeder. I did this on a Colleton County property 3 years ago, after 2 seasons of inconsistent results. The camera data showed a creek crossing I had never hunted that had sounder activity on over 70% of October nights. I had been sitting over feeders a quarter-mile away, while the most reliable movement on the property was walking through an area I had never considered. Find those spots first. The bait setups are easier to optimize once you understand the underlying movement. The reference script that came with this title was from a Florida public land hunter, and his core advice, find the water, find the mud, find the shade, and you find the hogs, is exactly right for summer hunting. I want to extend that principle slightly. On properties with outstanding water, hogs in summer will concentrate around any point of soil moisture, a seasonal creek that has reduced to damp mud, a low-lying area adjacent to a soybean irrigation field where runoff accumulates, a cattle pond that has dropped to a muddy edge. The mud itself is what they need for thermoregulation, not just the water. A thin mud coat applied by rolling in a wallow lowers core body temperature in the same way that sweating lowers ours. When temperatures push above 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and roughly hot enough to feel the heat radiating off blacktop through your boot soles, hogs need a wallow visit every few hours to maintain a viable body temperature. That biological necessity is your predictable movement window during the hottest months. Try these on your next sit. The ones about timing, stand position, and rest periods cost nothing and can be implemented immediately. The bait and feeder adjustments take a few weeks to produce camera confirmation. Give any change a minimum of 3 weeks before you evaluate it. Hogs are creatures of habit once a pattern is established. Your job is to create conditions where the pattern they establish runs through your shooting lane at a time when you can see it.